The title of this video is What Created Trump? Before I answer the question of what created Trump, let me tell you something about myself so that you understand whether my comments have any substance. My name is Mike Gimbel. I have been a communist all my life for over 70 years. I was even at Peekskill when the fascists attacked the Paul Robeson concert all the way back in 1949. For almost 4 decades, I served as a union delegate, union officer, union chapter president, and union executive board member of a New York City union representing about 7,000 workers. This video is meant as an appeal to all my brother and sister workers and to all the oppressed and their allies to see through all the lying propaganda put forward by our class enemies that has so distorted the history of our movement. Over the past 7 decades of my life, I have seen the world change enormously, but today I will speak about just the last 3 decades, which has been such a disaster for working and oppressed people all over the world. The last 3 decades represent an almost complete break from the prior optimism that existed within the workers and the oppressed of the world. There was a singular event some 30 years ago that not only created Trump and all the fascist movements around the world, and also created the many wars over this period. There was an event some 30 years ago that led to the imperialist military attacks on Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya, and Syria. There was an event some 30 years ago that is celebrated by the ruling class and which led in a domino effect that ended with the tragic overthrow of the Soviet Union. There was an event some 30 years ago that led to the ruthless capitalist attacks on our trade unions all over the world. There was an event some 30 years ago that led to all the attacks on the living conditions of the masses under the heading of austerity. There was an event some 30 years ago that has empowered the anti-woman, anti-abortion movement. There was an event some 30 years ago that has led to the many attacks involving mass murder done by white nationalist racists and a growth of fascist movements and the election and resulted in the election of Donald Trump. There was an event some 30 years ago that has enriched the billionaires at the expense of the workers and the oppressed of the world, where a handful of individuals now have as much wealth as half the population of our entire planet. There was an event some 30 years ago that exponentially speeded up the environmental destruction of our planet. There was an event some 30 years ago that has exponentially increased the possibility of World War III and the nuclear destruction of our planet. What was this tragic event which changed the world so much in so horrific a direction? That tragic event was the tearing down of the Berlin Wall. The tearing down of the Berlin Wall signified the worldwide defeat of the working class and all the oppressed peoples and nations in the so-called Cold War battle that ended with the victory of the world capitalist vampires led by U.S. imperialism. While we rightly cheer the heroic defeat of the Nazis by the Soviet Red Army in World War II, we need to also realize just how temporary that victory was. That Red Army victory only served to unify our class enemy during the Cold War. After World War II, the capitalist rulers of the USA were able to unify the capitalist rulers of Europe and Japan, together with their comprador vassals in the oppressed nations, in a worldwide political and military confrontation with the workers and the oppressed, which is called the Cold War. It was a class war on a worldwide scale, and in the end, our side lost temporarily. I repeat, temporarily. The vampires won, but it's only temporary. It's a temporary defeat. When the Berlin Wall fell, the corporate media spread the news and the pictures worldwide as the demonstration of their victory over our class and of the victory over the oppressed. The dominoes in Eastern Europe quickly fell, and the workers' bastion of the USSR was quickly overthrown. The workers' states in Eastern Europe, before the overthrow, together with the USSR, China, Vietnam, Cuba, Laos, and the DPRK, were at that time all liberated zones, liberated by our class, where the power of the capitalist vampires had been eliminated. In particular, up to that time, it was the economic strength of the Eastern European worker states led by the Soviet Union which had the military and economic strength to defend our class worldwide. As an example, prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall, Iraq was able to maintain its independence. On several occasions, when U.S. imperialism threatened to militarily attack Iraq, the USSR stopped them by threatening nuclear war. During the existence of the Eastern European worker states, MAD, Mutual Assured Destruction, the threat of nuclear war, prevented U.S. imperialist attacks, whether in Iraq, Libya, Syria, or Yugoslavia, or Cuba. Once the USSR and the worker states in Eastern Europe disappeared, so did the ability of small nations to defend themselves in the face of the most vicious and aggressive ruling class the world has ever seen, U.S. imperialism. The result of the victory of these capitalist vampires in the overthrow of the Eastern European worker states and the overthrow of the USSR has been a 3-decade-long lavish festival with the capitalist vampires engorging themselves in an orgy of greed at the worldwide expense of our class and the oppressed. The fall of the Berlin Wall has created massive wealth at one end and massive pain at our end. A few billionaires now possess more money than half the world's population. That did not happen by accident. When the Berlin Wall fell, you lost your standard of living, which was won in decades of struggle during the existence of the Soviet Union. When the Berlin Wall fell, millions of our fellow workers and the oppressed became target practice for the capitalist vultures led by U.S. imperialism. As a result, millions have been killed and millions more have been made refugees, and our unions, our trade unions, have been on a headlong retreat worldwide. We must not allow the imperialist corporate media propaganda machine to continue to brainwash the people about the USSR and the Eastern European worker states. They were our protectors. The Soviet Union and the Eastern European worker states were your protectors. They were the protectors of your unions. They were the protectors of the civil rights movement. They were the protectors of the women's rights movement. They were the protectors of the immigrants. They were the protectors of the indigenous peoples. They were the protectors of the small nations against the colonial rulers. They were the protectors of the workers and the oppressed all over the world. They were the protectors of the weak against the powerful. They were our liberated territory. The overthrow of the Eastern European worker states and the USSR was an historic defeat for our class. But we do a disservice to our class and to Marxism if we fail to refute all the capitalist lies about our class victories. Do not let the capitalist vampires destroy our glorious history. Every communist must defend the legacy of those worker states. And as well, there is a bright side to these 30 years of tragedy. There is a bright side. There is always a silver lining, even in the worst tragedy. Today is a dark period in our history, but it is always darkest right before the dawn. The capitalist vampires proclaimed the end of history 30 years ago after the overthrow of the Soviet Union. But the crisis that has come has brought them to an important fact. The capitalist vampires forgot one important fact. The class war did not cease to exist. Quite the contrary, because the class didn't disappear. In fact, the working class worldwide is much more massive with each passing day. Our social weight, our classes, the working classes' social weight, and therefore our potential power, has increased enormously in the last 30 years. The ruling classes, as they accumulate more and more wealth, isolate themselves. They're becoming more and more isolated. From who? From the masses. They're so rich, they're so far away. The more that they accumulate, the more angry the masses become. A small but still unorganized sample of what is to come in the class struggle can be seen in France today with the yellow vests. It is only a warning to the rulers as of now. But the march on the Bastille will happen, but this time on a worldwide scale. Just be patient. This is just the beginning. The world today is sitting on a knife's edge of anger at the wealth that is being accumulated at one end and the pain that's being accumulated at our end. A few billionaires cannot hold power over the many billions of our class forever. Their isolation is their weakness. Yes, they have billions, but we are billions. Only a few decades ago, even here in the USA, the agricultural and rural population was greater than the population of the metropolitan centers. That is no longer the case. The potential power of the working class has increased enormously, even as our unions are being destroyed. With the capitalist rulers' enormous greed and their policies of austerity, they are playing with fire. They are awakening the anger of the masses. The problem for the capitalist vampires is this growing anger of our class and the oppressed all over the world, but more critically, the anger that is growing right here within the belly of the beast here in the USA. The election of Donald Trump has revealed to this population, to the population of the United States, that there is a widening gap between the rulers and the ruled, and people are recognizing that they are them and not us. The anger by the masses of workers at the racism, at the homophobia, and the white supremacy of Donald Trump is a symptom of a country that is starting to divide into separate class camps. This crisis cannot be solved by the Democratic Party's efforts to fool the population into believing that they have the answer. They do not have the answer because they, just as with Trump, represent Wall Street. The problem for the capitalist vampires, who are politically represented by both Donald Trump and the Democratic Party, is the fact that the capitalist market, that is where they get their money, selling the goods in their capitalist market, has hit a brick wall and is being further destroyed on top of that by their own policies of austerity in this crisis. The workers, who are the ones producing everything, are also the market that must be able to purchase those goods. The workers buy the goods. Austerity, by reducing the money that they have, reduces that ability to buy the goods that they produce. If workers have no money to buy the goods, the current crisis in the capitalist market must increase. And we know that the anarchy of capitalist production inevitably has its own beat, its boom and bust crisis that has to take place. It has no way to escape from it. Since its birth, it's always functioned that way through boom and bust because of the anarchy of the market. Austerity will not save the capitalists. It will only bring the crisis of their market closer to a collapse. Boom and bust is organic to capitalist production. Even the capitalist rulers know that as a fact. And they know that an economic bust is coming. They know it. We know it. The capitalists, with their austerity program, taking the money, as much money as they can out of our hides, are like the sorcerer's apprentice, creating a massive angry explosion of the masses when that bust comes, simply because that bust will be on top of the anger that they themselves generated by that policy of austerity. And of course, the center of that market, the center of the capitalist system, is right here in the USA. And that bust will be most apparent here and will have the most outrage right here at home. And that's the positive. That's a big positive. However, here's the negative and a big part of why I do the video. Despite all this mass anger, there is a serious problem that needs to be addressed and discussed by all who consider themselves as communists and communist activists and organizers. The problem for the workers and the oppressed all over the world is that our defeat in the Cold War has led to the fracture of our movement, our communist movement, into smaller and smaller pieces. We must be honest with ourselves about this crisis for our movement. We must also recognize that the fracturing of our movement started long before the Berlin Wall fell. It began. The wall just took it down to the situation we face today. The fracture of the communist movement comes as a result of our own history of many decades of worldwide sectarianism. This tragic history of past sectarianism must not and cannot be allowed to damage the future struggle of the workers and the oppressed that is coming not so long in the future. Without a unified communist movement, the workers and the oppressed will be left on their own at the very time when their communist leadership is most needed. So what's the answer? The answer is that we desperately need to start the process of unifying the communist movement. It's simple. But is it so simple with all the sectarianism that we have to get rid of? That's what makes it not so simple. If we call ourselves internationalists, the word is the world, internationalists, while at the same time splitting ourselves up into more and more little sectarian groups, isn't that hypocrisy? Beyond stupidity, it's hypocrisy. Are we not throwing Marxism out the window? Marxism is about internationalism. Are not the capitalist vampires our enemies? Internationalists? They are internationalists. They reckon they carried on the whole world, the Cold War, unified. They were internationalists and remain internationalists. They are united against communism, aren't they? So what do? We must have the courage, regardless of whether you call yourself a Stalinist or a Trotskyist or a Maoist or simply a Marxist-Leninist. We have to find a way to reach a hand out to each other in order to begin a discussion that can have hopes of leading to the kind of unified communist movement that actually existed under Lenin. We need a real communist international rather than the myriad sectarian groups that currently exist that all proclaim themselves to be the real Marxist-Leninists. You consider yourself an internationalist, don't you? Aren't we all? Do you want to see a unity of our movement? Reach out to your potential comrades. If we cannot win over our own fellow communists in unity, just to discuss this problem, how are you going to win over any others? Don't they, who are outside of our movement, see our disunity? Isn't that disunity a damaging factor in the struggle? The masses never will be attracted to weakness. Why would they be attracted to weakness and small groups? It doesn't work that way. The masses do not want to lose, they want to win. They could care less about our internal debates and discussions and squabbles. Is not that disunity a huge problem in attracting future comrades? Don't we want them? Well, we're not going to get them if we're all fighting each other rather than the imperialists. Let us start the process of moving towards unity, which will create the strength that can attract the masses and defeat the imperialists. For the only revolutionaries in the last century and a half that have been able to do it have always been led by communist organizations. Let's start that process of moving towards unity. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that this video has been helpful in focusing on how our movement can go forward. Please go to my Facebook site entitled A Call for Leninist Unity. I have other videos there. Please watch those videos on this very subject. Please, with unity between you and us and all our comrades, we will win. Si se puede. Thank you.